So, Sam, tell us a little bit about your background, your early life, coming to the Bronx, or were you born here? Were you born in another country? Just give us a brief biological. It doesn't have to be brief because everybody's story is different, right? So just give us some information about that.
Yes, I was actually, I was born in Honduras, Central America, and I was about 12 years old when my five siblings came to New York City, July 14th to be exact, 1974. We came and settled directly on Simpson Street, 1075 Simpson Street, apartment 8. And because it was during the turbulent years of the South Bronx, 1974, 8 months later, our apartment building caught on fire, and we were displaced. The Red Cross came, set us up at a hotel across the street from the Empire State Building. We were there for about 6 months until permanent housing was found, and then we came back to the Bronx to 140th Street between St. Anne's and Cypress. Lived there with my mother and my 5 brothers. We actually were able to come to the United States because of our older brother, who at the time was in the Army in the 60s. And during those times, you could have asked for extended families, brothers, and he literally got all 5 of us at the same time. My only sister, which is my older sister as well, came about a year after he came in the 60s, and then followed by my mother. And then they worked on our papers, and 5 of us came and lived together in the South Bronx, and I've never left the Bronx. As a child, I went to the local elementary school, went to South Bronx High School, one of the first graduating classes, and the only time I left for an extended period of time, I went to Stony Brook University, and I lived there on campus. And when I graduated Stony Brook, I lived in Washington Heights with some of my roommates for about 2 years, and then came back to my beloved Bronx, and I've been living here ever since.
Yeah, you kind of stood in that area. I mean,
That was, believe it or not, and who would have thought many years later that I would be fortunate enough to return to 140th between Willis and Brook Avenue, and raise my 2 children there, my wife and I, and be part of the community that I've always been part of. And I've always lived in the South Bronx, with the exception probably about a year after I graduated college. I lived in Washington Heights with some roommates, sort of like to keep that whole college feel together. And I did that for about a year to 2 years, and then I came back to my hometown of South Bronx.
When you came, what was the year you first came to?
I came July 14, 1974.
1974. Can you tell me how many Hondureños were living in the Bronx at the time?
Believe it or not, I mean, today, I mean, there's a large Honduran population of over 200,000.
Yes,
the interesting thing is that back in the 70s, it was literally a much smaller community. We are of what they call in Honduras los inglesitos, because we spoke English, and that was our primary language, English and Spanish. So everyone that would come from Honduras in the 60s and 70s stayed in this community by Bathgate Intervale. That's where we were concentrated. So it was always like a welcoming home. You come, and that's where you acclimated. That's where you will go to Van Cortlandt Park on Sundays to watch soccer, and that's where you would have the parties and everything else. So the small Honduran culture was already a vibrant one, be it a smaller version of what it is today. And that's how we were all concentrated. So we had almost like a security network of relatives that were here earlier than I got here.
And that's across the board. I mean, when Puerto Ricans came, there was some type of network there. Dominicans come, so this is across the board. It's a natural process. When I went to South Bronx, I had a lot of friends from Honduras as well, and they lived in that enclave of Intervale Avenue,
that is correct,
Prospect and whatnot. So you know that you have that community, and it's amazing. Since the 70s, it's been like that. That's been the magnet for Hondurans coming over. So now you serve as the president for the Mott Haven Historic District Association. Just briefly tell us, what are your primary roles there?
Well, interestingly enough, the way the association came about was as a result of all this development that has been taking place throughout the Bronx, particularly the Mott Haven section of the Bronx. As you very well know, that is probably the ideal location when you're talking about quickness to Manhattan.
Right.
And one of the things that I, and along with some of my neighbors, started talking about this. And it says, you know what, we need to make sure that it's not just preservation of buildings, because we do live in a historic district, but also the preservation of the history, the culture, the music, and the people.
Right.
And we then decided to go into this structural organization called the Mott Haven Historic Districts Association, because of the 3 historic districts.
Right.
And everyone is a member automatically.
Yeah.
And we specifically left the word homeowners association because by virtue not everyone had the ability to purchase a home.
Right.
And we didn't want to discriminate on the basis because we have people that are friends and family that live in the surrounding tenements and projects. So we wanted to make them feel at home, just like we as homeowners also felt that we were at home.
Yes.
And the mission is very, very simple. It's exactly that, the preservation of historical architectural buildings, but more so the people that have been around since the 60s and 70s, the music and the culture.
Yes.
So that was the lightning rod of the association.
Right.
And then, of course, in setting it up, what I needed to do was to develop partnerships so that we could add some credibility to the fact that the people who originally started the association were people who've been in the neighborhood for decades.
Yes.
Even though forward-looking, there will be plenty of the newer people coming in who are going to be part of it and who may ultimately...
Hopefully they'll be a part of it,
right? Hopefully they'll be a part of it, and if they do take leadership in and understand and respect how this whole organization came about. So that's the beginning of it. We wanted to get, as I mentioned, some of the recognition to legitimize the organization. And one of the things that we did was we applied for recognition from the Historic District Council. We wanted Mott Haven to be recognized as one of the 6 to celebrate, a very prestigious undertaking that they do every year for several years, in which they identify 6 neighborhoods every year that are deemed historical relevance and that have some characters that are worth preserving. And we were fortunate enough to get Mott Haven on the map as one of the 2017 6 to celebrate. With that came a lot of technical support on the preservation side because, as you well know, Latinos and African Americans are not known for work in preservation. You know, preservation is often viewed by older white women in particular who have inherited lots of funds and they do what they do. And that's the other angle that I wanted to get into. So HTC has been giving us a lot of technical support. There was a grant associated with being one of the 6 to celebrate, which are now enabling us to develop a much richer website. But more importantly, attending a lot of conferences and meeting up with a lot of other historians and people who are doing preservation in their respective communities. And that obviously led to several articles in newspapers, television interviews in terms of what we are doing in our community. Because Mott Haven, believe it or not, is still the Bronx, right? And when you talk about a historic district, you would envision coming into a historic district and automatically you know you're in a historic district because you see the designated maps, you see the brown signs, you see the plaques. Well, we're lacking a lot of that. And one of the challenges that we have in working with HTC is that we're making this general appeal that, hey, you know, Mott Haven Historic District was the first designated historic district in all of the Bronx, as you well know. But the signs, you have to struggle, you know, people walking through. And what we want to make sure is that the newer people that are coming in with a lot more resources who purchase some of these townhomes they're going to say, okay, we're here now. We need to do this. We need to do the other. This attorney's going to write a check. He's going to put in $20,000. And we don't want that kind of movement from that level, from a financial strong point. We just want it to be organic, in that regard. Grassroots, as you mentioned.
But I do remember the Bronx in the 80s. I do remember the destruction and whatnot. So coming from your standpoint in preservation and leading this group and this collective, right? How important that is for people in the Bronx, living in the Bronx, students, and people coming to the Bronx, like moving in. How important, how instrumental what you're doing in the association, how instrumental will it be for generations to come?
Well, that's a very good question, because I too embrace change, right? I mean, it's inevitable. The work that I do with the association, the work that I do in terms of the tourism and all of that, that's all volunteer. I get nothing from it, right? I am a product of the South Bronx. Although I wasn't born here, but I was here in my earlier youth in the pivotal times, in the early 70s.
Anybody that came to the Bronx to live in the 1970s,
I know.
They earned their Bronx card.
And the thing is, and I see, because I only opine on social media. I don't talk about anything personal. I don't take political sides on any issue. I just, if there's an article that I find of interest that talks about our beloved South Bronx, I post. I don't add commentaries to it. Because, and most of the people, and I see others that are against development for whatever vertical reason or horizontal reason there are. I mean, I have been fortunate, as I said to you, education was my focus, because I know if you're educated in New York or in the United States, it ultimately leads to a comfortable lifestyle. And I've been in investment research for the last 25, 30 years. So I have two sides of myself, right? There's the day side that I wake up and I deal with the financial markets, and that's that side of my life. Most people in my neighborhood that have known me for decades have no idea what I do for a living, other than they know that I wake up. Sometimes they see me wearing a suit, and sometimes they see me doing other things. And it's not for me to tell them in detail what I do. But what they do see is they see me all the time. Because I had choices, right? I could have went to Connecticut or Florida or somewhere else and then raised my children in those environments. But I think it's very important. So getting back to your question, having seen everything in the 70s and 80s and 90s and now in the present time, I too would love to get out of my home, make a left turn or a right turn, enjoy a coffee, enjoy a great meal, enjoy entertainment where I don't have to get on the subway and go elsewhere outside of the community to do that. So with regards to the Historic Districts Association's mission, is really when we were developing and working with Bronx Historical Tours was very, very important, because in my mind, I often see all these tour buses, Times Square through Harlem. They don't stop, they keep moving. And all you see is a bunch of people taking photographs, and then you see somebody talking about the history, but they don't engage, right? So these are just transients, pay their $45 or whatever it is they pay. They get a great tour, but they don't really get a feel and a take and a taste. So what we've done is that was this creation of this sustainable tourism, and Bronx Historical Tours has pioneered that concept, right? And that's one of the reasons that I partnered, because the person who runs that organization, a tour company, Alexandra Maruri, she's been doing it single-handedly for the last 8 years. And she too is an immigrant and came to the South Bronx in the 70s. So we have almost the same perspective, right? We've seen a lot of the ugly, the bad, and now some of the good. So with regards to sustainable tourism, all these businesses, the businesses, the local bodegas, and every business that's been around for quite a while, we've spoken to all of them and says, you're going to start seeing people walking through the neighborhood. You're going to see them either walking with myself or with this person or this other Bronx-based person. just embrace the idea that they may stop in front of your establishment, they may buy a water, they might buy a coffee. Because what we do with every person that books a tour through Bronx Historical Tours, we tell them that you're walking through our community that's in transition. But we also have a responsibility to make sure that the merchants, the mom and pop, the person selling the piragua, the Mexican lady that's selling the fruit stand, the other young immigrant that's there, we want to make sure that they stay there. And in order for them to stay there, they need business, right? So this is one of the reasons why we do it in this manner. I sort of coined the concept, right, of ambassadors. Every tourist that comes to the South Bronx, I always tell them that you too have a responsibility. Yeah, you like the tour guide that gave you the tour, you like what you saw, you couldn't believe the drastic changes in the Bronx, you couldn't believe what you read old magazines about the Bronx being dilapidated, but then you're stunned to see all the beauty around. But you too have a responsibility to support the local businesses that you're walking through. But more importantly, when you get back to Spain, Germany, Italy, wherever you came from, you tell them that you had a wonderful experience and it's not what you think. You know, some of you came out of curiosity because of the images that you had, but you couldn't even find a burnt out building. All you saw was amazing structures and new structures, river views, parks, and people are still happy. And that's the kind of thing that I want you guys to take back.
What you're doing in Mott Haven, you know, it's amazing, and especially in a place where it was hard hit, one of the hardest hit places in the Bronx, going, you know, in the 70s and 80s. So with that being said, how did you get here? You know, you're doing this in a neighborhood. You've been living here for so long. You've invested your time, energy, your expertise. You have a day job, right? You have your own different world. You know, during the day, 9 to 5 or whatever. You get up, you go to work. So what brought you here? You know, what were the experiences? You know, I know you came here in the 70s and you had that inspiration to do something for your community. So since then, what were the struggles? What was the processes to getting where you're at today?
Well, that's obviously that.
In a nutshell.
that process was quite a long time. I would say for 15 straight years, right? I worked on Wall Street, and I remember in 2000 when I left Wall Street. I wanted to do something outside of finance. So what I then consciously made a decision to do, I remember very clearly the Department of Education was setting up these parent coordinator positions, right? They wanted to be advocates for parents. They wanted to be the buffer between the principal and the parents. They needed somebody to mitigate any relationship. So I decided to go into education. So I took a job as a parent coordinator because I also understood that some of the challenges in the Bronx that some of our parents have at times is the communication level with some of the principals. Some of them may not even understand the culture in the school that their principal's in. And there might be a communication barrier, there might be a cultural barrier every time that a parent is called in because of disciplinary reasons with the child. Then the mother or father have to then come in there and feel, oh, who do I speak to that can...
And who's going to relate? Who's going to
understand? So that's how I got into education. So I was a parent coordinator for about a year. And I got the educational bug then. And then I said to myself, I wanted to do something much larger than just being a parent coordinated advocate for parents in one school. I wanted to be able to do it for a lot of schools. So at the time, I took on a position of director of student recruitment for a non-for-profit educational company that was providing free after-school tutoring in New York City public schools. So as a director of student recruitment, I was able to recruit literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students, speak to them, hire hundreds and hundreds of teachers to be able to provide after-school tutoring to some of these kids that were struggling in elementary all the way up to high school, which was very vital. And that's a passion that I had because I had tutoring assistant back in the day to get me where I was, and I thought that would have been a very vital thing to do. I did that for about 2 years, and then there was another tutoring company that wanted to get into the business in the Bronx as well. I opened up an office, 3rd Avenue and 149th Street.
Yeah.
And again, it was about bringing a company from Boston, hired local teachers, hired local staff, and ran that operation there for a couple of years. And making it a thing, I was in education for about 10 years. Then I got a call back on Wall Street again, and I says, well, I think I've had an impact on a couple of hundred.
You went to make some money, right?
And then I went to make some money. That enabled me to then be able to purchase one of the historic townhouses.
I mean, right.
No,
you were investing in the community.
Oh, absolutely,
so
absolutely. I bought 2 businesses to the community that hired locally and hired hundreds of teachers in the Bronx. That's a little fact that most people don't realize that I did for a couple of years. I was one of the executive directors there, but that was part of the journey that got me to where I was. And then 15 years ago, when I went back to Wall Street and I was able to purchase my home, I've been there ever since. It was a conscious decision because I had friends of mine that we went to college, and you know they grew up. Some of them in the Bronx, and most of them decided I want to live in Manhattan or I want to go to Brooklyn, and they've done that, you know. And some of them left New York altogether, and they've taken their intellectual capital elsewhere, and they became a power base of that other community, even though they were transplants from this community. And I consciously, and I've always been comfortable in the Bronx. I've never lived in Brooklyn. I never lived in Queens or New Jersey or Staten Island. It's always been the South Bronx, and I recognize that. And you know, to raise a family and being consciously aware that they have to get educated, and they went to Catholic high school, but they both went to Spelman, and one graduated from Lehman, and the younger one is about to graduate from City College. So again, we are all products of this so-called South Bronx. Yeah. Now we are, and they are at a pivotal point where they already have seen the vast changes, right? Because for them it was overnight. All of a sudden they come out, there's a trendy restaurant at the corner, trendy cafe, or they'll take a couple of walks. They have choices from sushi to Mexican to American, you name it, you know? And that just, it literally happened for them overnight.
As a historian, as a person that's done these tours, knows the history of the Bronx, seeing the changes, the legacy, Latinos, people's legacy, in fact, how important it is to the fabric of a community. Well,
that's what holds the community, believe it or not. Coincidentally, when I'm done with you, my mother-in-law, a perfect example, she is 90 years old.
God bless her.
Exactly, came to the South Bronx back in the 50s. So there was a group of them, you know, like my mother, who has she's still been alive.
What's her heritage?
She's from Inglesito.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
50s.
Yeah,
wow.
In the 50s. And believe it or not, they were homeowners. You know, some of them came to the Bronx. Some of them went to San Diego, different parts of California and Boston. So they came, but they were the ones who came here aggressively with a mission and vision to work. There was no such thing as getting hooked up on drugs or anything like that back then in the early 50s, as far as the migration of Hondureños, English-speaking Hondureños coming into the South Bronx. And like I mentioned to you, Intervale Avenue, you will go there. You will see these older men and women who are here who could tell you they put in 25 years at a local factory or worked in a factory, but they earned enough to be able to buy a home. You know, and you cannot erase that legacy just that way. So that's our trail into the community that we're in, and that's one of the reasons why. I mean, for 45 years I've been here, you know, and I witnessed that. You know, I would come into Intervale. I was 12 years old in 1974 but I see somebody who is 38 years old, who've been here for 20 years earlier. So you do that reverse math.
Yeah.
They've been working at a factory for 20 years, and then all of a sudden, they've been, so that's important. And that's, again, I think that had an impact on me wanting to stay here. My older brother, he's 66 now, and he lives in the South Bronx. He just lives a few blocks from where I live. He never lived anywhere else other than the Bronx.
Yeah.
He came out of the military in the 60s and relocated. We all lived in the South Bronx.
Amazing.
And that's where our network of friends and family from Honduras came from. And we stayed within a couple of blocks from each other. And that's the part that requires even a more structural legacy to understand the true. Nobody's archiving that in that regard. And I think it's important. Maybe one of our kids might just take that project upon themselves and start interviewing some of the older states.
Well, this is
Exactly.
why we're doing this, right? How do you see it benefiting? How do you see that being either a negative or a positive force in what's going on as far as change in the South Bronx?
Well, the way I look at it, when the Brookfield deal, right? That's it's a done deal. Obviously, they're going to begin breaking ground in 2019.
This is right outside the bridge, right?
That is
Third
correct,
Avenue
the
Bridge.
Third Avenue Bridge.
Are they really tearing down that?
No, not as of yet. But all that open land now, that's gonna.
I know that's they're
done
gonna
deal.
build up, right?
So you're talking about what, 1,400 apartments?
Yes.
So if you do the math, you're talking about maybe conservatively like 3,500 more people.
Right.
So imagine 3,500 more people waking up in that southern part of the Bronx, Mott Haven, walking, right?
Right.
So my hope is that is going to, the tenants are going to create an amazing revenue stream that I'm hoping that they move and walk further north, right? And inevitably they're going to do it. You're not just going to stay on Bruckner and 138th Street. You're going to walk the neighborhoods. You're going to come into the historic districts. You're going to make your way to 149th Street and the Hub. And what I'm hoping is that these businesses that have been led by minorities continue to survive, because then you'll have more volume of people with more disposable income coming in there and making a spend. More revenue. They're not going to just spend it on trendy restaurants and bars and cafes, but I hope that it spreads even wider. I mean, that's my hope.
And that's the thing, because what's especially great is that most of these businesses, in fact, all of them, are owned by people of color. Owned by not only of color, people from the Bronx.
That's the funny thing. And if you peel the apple or the orange, the people who are greeting you are people who have a direct connection to the Bronx.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about it in panology. That's regardless of what people may say in terms of who owns the physical property itself. The genius and the concept came from two Latinos.
Yes.
You have Mott Haven Bar and Grill. That's being run by Rosa Garcia, a single mother of two. Yeah. You have Beecher, the U.S. establishment. These are African American and Latinos that have been part of the hip hop movement for decades.
Right.
You just name them. You have Charlie's Bar and Grill. I mean, you just name it. Yeah. These people just didn't fall out of the sky. You have Motley's Kitchen, which is in the most recent addition to 140th Street, an old converted church into what it is today. Those young couple, husband and wife, they purchased a home on 143rd Street. They're going to be raising their future kids there. So it's just business people coming in and dipping in. You have Bronx Native. What do you think? I mean, we're not building the towers, and what we hope is that we have access to the waterways and create promenades, and that they're sensitive to the community, because they're coming. You cannot stop it.
You do own property, a property on 141st, right? 140th. And you live in a brownstone. And are you renting, or is the whole thing yours?
The whole place is mine.
I'm sorry. You're occupying the whole thing.
Yes.
Okay.
What I've done is most of the people that own these townhouses on 140th and Alexander and Bertine, they generally will live on the top 2 floors. In the garden level, they turn it into a rental unit.
Right.
Just to help them offset expense.
Right.
For myself, my children at the time didn't want anyone in the house, right? So we had 3 floors for the last 12 years, right? And it came to a point where I started realizing that these kids stay in their room. They're not kids, they're young adults. Spend time in their room, and they go out, they come back, they may spend time on the parlor floor. And I was speaking to my wife, and I said, but wait a minute. We have a potential income-producing bottom garden level that leads to the backyard. And we got to do something about it, because I think it's a little bit ridiculous at this point. I mean, it was great to have parties we have 50, 60, 70 people enjoying it. So what I did was one of the small little projects that I got a couple of designers together, and wanted to make it like a public project. And I said, I want to convert this downstairs into like an Airbnb open suite.
Nice.
Right? And then I got a local photographer, took pictures of the neighborhood. I got a local company, Sobro Studios, that does Venetian plastering, and took on the project of doing the kitchen with that old stone type of Venetian plaster. Nice. I got some painters, I got someone who's doing the floor. My son played interior decorator, picked out the piece of furnishings, the kitchen. My wife picked out parts of the eclectic thing. So that's what we did. So we've been doing that now for the past 5 months. And the occupancy rate has been surprisingly well.
Nice.
And it goes back to the same conversation that we started with. I've had people from China, France, Brazil, Germany, Spain, Mexico, Uruguay, you name the country. And I always make it my business to always be there when a new person comes in.
Right.
Because I show them the space, they love the space, but more importantly, I give them a piece of history.
Yes.
I tell them I've been living here, I live above here, this neighborhood is such and such, and we always encourage.
How important is that?
I do it because they too are ambassadors.
Because you don't do it just to show off, right?
No.
You've had this sense of obligation to do that.
Oh yeah.
It's
what do you profit? Because it's not, again, it doesn't come from a profit-driven idea that I don't need to. If you're coming into my neighborhood from across the world, you're coming into the South Bronx.
Yes.
You could have stayed in Midtown Manhattan and paid $555 for one room, or stay in an 800 square feet historic home that you have an entire floor to yourself to do it as you wish. But I have to impart something. You just don't come here for the economic value to you. You're going to learn a little piece of something. Mm-hmm. And believe it or not, Angel, 9 out of 10 of these people end up spending an evening and going to one of the restaurants, one of the bars, or one of the coffee shops.
Good.
Because it's important that you just don't take their money and don't even see them when they arrive or even when they leave. And every one of these people, when they leave, the reviews are like amazing because they always make reference to I took the time to tell them about the history. And part of my description is a preservationist, right? Yeah. So they're already coming with this idea that, oh my God, I'm staying in this man's home. At some point, I'm going to ask him something about history, and he always points us to a local restaurant around the corner or a 5-minute Uber, and they literally take advantage to it because I don't want it to be like a hotel that have been taking so much advantage of the cheap rent. And hotels, boutiques are popping up all over the Bronx and Mott Haven, but they have what I call the Uber effect. Yeah. All you see is Ubers in front of these hotels.
Yes,
The guests come out,
yes.
jump in an Uber, go to Times Square, do
That's
all this
it.
spend, and come
They
back
spend
at
no
night.
time, yeah.
So it's now part of the other challenge that we have in working with Bronx Historical Tours is that we need to let the hotels know you need to start doing some encouragement because your business is in the South Bronx. You have your expenditure for the property that you have is so discounted relative to having it across the water. Why not let your guests say, oh, by the way, see that kiosk there? There's information from local businesses and establishments. You can take a guided tour of the community and learn a bit more and take it back to where they
Talk to me about this beautiful place. So when we spoke, you said, Angel, I want you to meet me at 1201 Vice Avenue, right? And this is a property you own. And you've mentioned that on the ground floor, on the first floor apartment, there is an art gallery. And it's a public space, and it's called Fogon, right?
Yes.
So talk to us a bit. First of all, tell us what Fogon means.
Fogon means literally fire. Just think of outside taking a couple of logs of wood and putting two pieces of brick together in a big pot.
Yeah.
So just imagine that. So, and Fogon Center for the Arts was actually created about 8 years ago. And the way it came about, again, is to build something for the community public use, right? And it was a conversation that me and my business colleague, we had with this young man. He says, you know, I go downtown to the New York Poet and do open mics and what have you, but coming back to the Bronx late at night on the subway is a long ride. And at the time, we were thinking, what do we do? Do we rent this back like a typical bodega, or do we convert it into an alternative art space?
Right.
So we decided to convert it into an art space. And it's in a place that has hosted many luminaries. Felix Pupi and Suar, one of the great Afro-Cuban dancers. We used to have Friday rumbas, we've had folklore, we've had from Garifuna music, from Gaita music, bomba, plena, you name it. And we've had hundreds of open mics. Some of our young men and women who have participated and have run galleries within here, they've gotten their experience from here, curating their own exhibits, and have gone on to curate exhibits at established museums, and it's been going now. Believe it or not, the place runs itself, right? All we're responsible for is for the financial expense of having the space. But if you're a poet, an artist, and want to have an event here, want to have an exhibit here, want to do a podcast here, want to come on Sundays to dance with the bomba plena, you are free to do it at no expense to you. So it's not a money driven, but it has become a cultural destination, the corner of Vice and Home. Many people have no idea who's behind it because we seldomly announce who we are. But it's other kids, not kids, but other young adults who congregate here for either monthly open mics or weekly bomba plena, preserving the Puerto Rican heritage, or any other type of activity. And it's been successful ever since we opened it.
Amazing. How important do you think this is for the community?
This has
community space, like more space for people.
This is public community space for those young men and women who are artists, be it visually or the spoken word or what have you.
And learn culture.
Learn culture
in the Bronx. So you've mentioned Garifuna, right? As you know, Latinos are the largest ethnic group in the borough. They're also one of the most diverse in the world. Not everyone speaks Spanish.
Correct.
You know, Mexicans speak other tongues.
Of course.
And in the Honduran culture, you have Garifuna people as well who speak different, right? Can you shed a little bit of light on the Garifa community in the Bronx? And the reason why I say that, you know, I've mentioned the diversity. A lot of the people that will hear this type of thing, they're going to be students. And a lot of these students, they're still not aware of how diverse, people are in the Bronx. And so just talk to me a little bit about the Garifuna people. Do you know when they got here in the Bronx? Did they come in earlier stages?
That's, I'm not too.
They weren't the English, right?
Yeah, I'm not too deep in the
Right.
in the history as far as their migration from Honduras.
Right.
But in Honduras, to just give you a bit of dynamic, if you look at myself and one of my fellow Garifuna, I mean, we look like African,
Right.
Afro-Latinos, right? But then we on the one side were called Inglesitos because all we spoke was just Spanish and English.
Right.
The Garifuna people were expelled from St. Vincent about 220 years ago.
Okay.
So they all were shipped over, and they ended up in Belize, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica. And these were individuals that only spoke an African dialect,
Right.
which was the Garifuna. Deep culture that dates back to, it's just amazing.
Right.
And they came to Honduras as an example, right? They went to Costa Rica as well, and other parts of Latin America. And you could tell the difference between us Inglesitas and them because they didn't speak any English, and they only spoke their dialect, and some of them obviously spoke Spanish, and eventually a lot of them go back and forth between Spanish and their dialect, the Galician dialect.
Do you know how many live here, or are there?
I believe from what my colleague Jose Avila had said, and that would be a perfect person that will put the entire context of the Galician, and we will arrange for that topic on that because he is a resident expert on that.
Yeah.
I believe it's over 200,000.
Wow.
Garifunas that are now living in the Bronx.
Wow, that's big.
It's big. It's a very large voting block as well.
Right.
Quite large, believe it or not. And
Wow.
I must say, even though the Inglesitas, for the most part, were here in larger numbers in the earlier 60s and 50s, the Garifunas literally structured themselves much better, I must admit it and I must say it, in the sense that they became a force.
Right.
Because of the way they've been united as such. And they've been recognized by the local elected officials. I mean, for the last couple of years, they have this Abrazo Garifuna,
Yep.
and all the local politicians, show up to this because they sponsor it because they understand how united they are. They are American citizens and they vote in numbers. Whereas us Inglesitos, although we took it for granted, that we had the privilege of coming here and we spoke the language here, we had the fluidity and we were engaged in a lot of things. We were really not that structured. Right. We were sort of splintered away in that regard. So, but the Garifuna, I mean, that history dates back, I mean, hundreds of years.
Amazing.
Hundreds of years.
So, do you have anything going on now, like any efforts in the community? Are you campaigning for preservation of any buildings or?
Yeah, what we're doing now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to continue to improve the streetscape. One of the things that finally throughout Mott Haven, in particular 140, 139, there was a lot of tree pruning that was done. Right. The next campaign, as I mentioned, is the increase of signage and plaques in the neighborhood.
Especially on 142nd Street.
That's correct.
The picture really,
yeah. Think about that, right?
Wow.
Just think about that. I mean, you have
there's nothing there. It's an empty lot.
You just
not even a sign on a stick. There's nothing there.
It's unfortunate. And try to do some tree guards throughout the neighborhood. I know it's inevitable. It's going to happen, right? It's going to happen because of different forces. Yes. But I want it to at least happen because of the grassroots in the community. And beyond that, I am on the Inglesito side. I've been working with Jose. We are trying to now work on this project. It's going to be called Las Americas. Mm-hmm. If you think about it, the Bronx does not have a venue that bring all the the Americas, as I call them, right? South and Central Americas, to one destination where you can have a great meal, see a variety of culture,
Right.
have a live venue, be an art space, be an entertainment space,
All in one.
be all
right.
in one. You know, like a huge 10,000 square feet space that you can go with your wife and say, let's go there. You look at a menu as an example.
Mm-hmm.
You have food from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Cortés, whatever that is, and at the same time enjoy whatever exhibit is going on, watch a sporting event, and then watch local bands perform in live, you know.
And where you want to do this?
That's the $1 million question. We're developing the business plan now. We're almost to completion,
Right.
and we hope to leverage a nice piece of property anywhere in the Bronx. It really doesn't matter, because if we build it, they will come. So that's our thing, because you get we get in little pieces of it, right? But nothing under one single. We're almost at the same concept of a Fogon Center for the Arts,
Right.
except for we don't have the food.
Nice.
And it's not large enough to accommodate 500 people at any given time. So
That's amazing. What do you want a student from Fordham University, or from a student from another part of the country or another world coming to the Bronx, studying, using its great resources? You know, what would you like them to walk away with when they hear an interview like this?
I think if you're talking about the present and going into the future, I think it's very, very important for these students to understand that there was deeper history beyond the beautiful new buildings and the promenades and the greenery that you're seeing. This has been a community who has been deep in culture, history, music, as an example, the diversity of the Latinos in this community. As you indicated, I mean, the Latinos are over 50% of the population of the 1.4 whatever million that are living here. So they are a collective force. They're not going to disappear.
Right.
So when you come in as a student and you're learning about this particular project, all of us that you're hearing our voices, we have a legacy, and we spread our legacy not only to our respective children and communities, but also to students who want to learn the fact that the university is in the middle of the Bronx.
It's the Bronx,
right? And there is contextual history that goes with it, and don't just look at the Hip Hop Museum as one of the greatest things, but it's beyond that.
Yeah.
And there's deep musical history.
Absolutely.
And culture beyond the
It's beyond Cardi B?
Yep, beyond Cardi B and beyond the birth of hip hop. So,
birth of hip hop.
Yeah.
So, Sam, I want to thank you once again for giving me the time. I know you run a busy schedule, and you're doing a lot of great things in the community. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to learn more about what you do, about your legacy here in the Bronx. And this project is for you as well.
Yep.
So if there's anything you want to add on to it, we can always come back and have another session like this. But yeah, thank you, and thank you for doing what you're doing in the Bronx community today.
No, thank you again for inviting me to be part of something that's going to be preserved in infamy.
Yeah, good.
It's great. Thank you.